The purpose of this video is to provide you with some additional information that you will need to be able to do problems with triangle congruence, and we will look at some examples. The first thing is recall vertical angles. Vertical angles are two angles that are opposite each other when two straight lines cross. Also recall that vertical angles are congruent, which means that they are equal. So in the figure on the left, which I like to call this figure a bow tie shape since it kind of looks like a bow tie, in this type of figure, you will always have vertical angles. The vertical angles will be in the middle of the two figures, which I have highlighted here in green. So we have angle ACB is congruent or equal to angle ECD. So when you have this type of figure, these angles will not be marked as congruent, but they are always congruent. So this is something additionally that you can add that you know. The next piece of information is something we have not covered yet, and this is the reflexive property. The reflexive property is when an angle or a line segment is congruent to itself. So in triangle ACD, we have this line AB that goes down through the middle of it and creates a triangle on the left side and the right side. Both of these two triangles share a side, side AB. So in the left-hand triangle, side AB is congruent to side AB in the right side triangle. So we can say that line segment AB is congruent to line segment AB. Some additional information is that the only theorems that prove two triangles are congruent are SSS, SAS, ASA, AAS, and HL. If it is not one of these, your answer will be not congruent. So let's look at some examples. So the directions say to determine if the two triangles are congruent. If they are, state how you know. State how you know, you will either list SSS, SAS, ASA, AAS, or HL. Remember that if it is not any of these 5 possibilities, your answer will simply be not congruent. So let's look at number 1. So in number 1, we can see that these angles on the far left-hand side and the far right-hand side both have 1 angle mark. That means that these two angles are congruent. We have another pair of angles that have 2 marks inside of the angle, which indicate those two angles are congruent. And the final thing that we know is that these two triangles are sharing a side. So we can also say that this middle side is congruent to itself. So in the left-hand figure, we have angle, and then we're going to travel around the triangle, angle, side. And if we look at the right-hand triangle, we also have angle, angle, and side again. So since both triangles are AS in that order, these two triangles are congruent by angle, angle, side. So looking at number 2, the first thing that I notice is that the left-hand triangle is a right triangle, which will also make the right-hand triangle a right triangle due to the fact that this top line is a straight line, so both of those angles are 90 degrees. So recall when you have a right triangle that HL is a pretty likely possibility. It's not always necessarily going to be HL, but it's at least something to make sure you look for. So one thing that I noticed after noticing that these are both right triangles is that these two triangles share a side. So that means that this middle side is going to be congruent to itself. So I do have a right angle, and this is the hypotenuse, and this will be a leg. And the same thing in the right-hand triangle. So these two triangles are congruent, and they're congruent by HL. Looking at number 3, these two triangles are not sharing a side, so I just need to look at what information is provided already in the triangles. So looking at the first triangle, I notice I have an angle, and then as I travel around the shape, I have a side and then another side. And in the right-hand triangle, I have an angle, and then as I travel around the triangle, I have a side and then a side. So this order is not one of our 5 ways, so your answer here would be not congruent. Remember, it has to be SSS, SAS, in that order, ASA, AAS, or HL. Looking at number 4, I notice that in this figure I have the bow tie shape. When we have the bow tie shape, we are always going to have vertical angles in the middle of the figure. These angles will always be congruent. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and mark these 2 angles here in the middle as congruent. Notice I already have a pair of angles that have 1 angle mark, so that's the reason I used 2 angle marks for each of those angles. So looking at this triangle on the top left side, I have angle, and then as I travel around I have a side, and then an angle. Starting in the same position in this other triangle, I have an angle, and then as I travel I have a side, and then I end with an angle. So these 2 triangles are congruent, and they're congruent by angle, side, angle, since that is the order of the letters. Let's look at 2 more examples. So in number 5, I noticed that these 2 triangles are sharing a side. So that means I can mark the side that they share as congruent due to the reflexive property. Notice I already had sides that had 1 tick mark and 2 tick marks. That is the reason that I used 3 tick marks. So now in the top triangle, as I travel around this figure, I have side, side, side. And then I have the same thing in the bottom triangle. So these 2 triangles are congruent, and they are congruent by side, 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 SSS. Our final example, notice that it is a bow tie shape. In the bow tie shape, you will always have vertical angles, and they will be congruent. These angles will always be located in the middle of the 2 triangles. So I will go ahead and mark those 2 angles congruent. In the top figure, I have S, A, S as I travel around the triangle. In the bottom figure, going in the same order, I have S, A, S. So these 2 triangles are congruent, and they are congruent by SAS. The main things to remember when doing problems for triangle congruence is to make sure you look for bow tie shapes which have vertical angles in the middle, 2 triangles that are sharing a side, and then due to the reflexive property, that side that they share will be congruent to itself. And always make sure you go in order around the triangle. Thanks for watching this video. You will next complete the triangle congruence homework on Edge Elastic. Remember, if you have any questions about the videos or about the homework, please do not hesitate to ask. Once you have completed the triangle congruence homework on Edge Elastic, please complete the triangle congruence assessment also on Edge Elastic.